How long, Erica?
Shall we dance?
Yeah, we're live. Oh. Is Erica alive?
I don't know. She'll let us know.
We
are live. Yes. Hello and welcome everyone to QuaranCon2020. I am illustrator Chita Bejedo, and this is the illustrations panel, book covers, maps, and art. A picture is worth 1,000 words. Here we'll discuss what artworks brings to writing and the steps they take to bring the stories to life. Well, let's give a warm welcome to our panelists. Hello, everyone. Here we have A.F. Stewart, an independent author who has published novellas and story collections with a few side trips into poetry. She writes horror and fantasy and makes her own book covers, my personal favorite being Visions and Nightmares. Welcome, Anita.
Hi, glad to be here. As you mentioned, I write horror and fantasy, and here is the Visions and Nightmares cover.
It's amazing.
Yeah, I'm actually especially proud of that because you can see the reflection down there in the mirror. That took me forever to get right. So, and it finally actually worked, and it made the arm come out of the mirror, so I'm really pumped that I got that right.
Oh, that's amazing. We'll go back to that in a minute. So also with us is the video game artist and designer, Josh Foreman, who has been professionally building worlds for video games and novels for over 2 decades on franchises such as Guild Wars, and Tales from Talifa. He's also the co-author for The Scarred King, Book 1 Exile, and his next book is coming out next month. Congratulations and welcome, Josh.
Thank you.
And last but not least, we have another world builder and writer, Michael R. Baker, an avid video gamer and cartographer who brings the fantasy world from the mind onto paper. The Thousand Scars is Michael's debut novel and the first of the epic fantasy series.
We're going to have a scar off. We've got
both scars. What was that?
Hey guys. Yeah. It's good.
Just heads up to check out the Artist Alley for more information about our panelists and their social media. And let's get the party started. There you go, Josh. You were talking.
I was talking over someone's introduction, so that was very
yes,
rude.
You were. How dare you?
I want to cede the floor to Michael.
Thank you. I feel very out of place here at the moment, but it's good. I'll show you. That's the reason I disappeared. I realized I didn't have my book on hand, but until I remembered that I did. This is Thousand Stars. It came out 2017 in December, but it's currently not for sale right now because I'm rewriting it. With the launch date of, I don't know, it's not done yet.
I think we've all been there.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm going to start asking you a question for everyone to answer. And let's start with Anita first, ladies first. So why don't we start with getting to know a bit of your background and what led you to where you are now professionally?
Well, I've always liked writing and art and poetry and stuff, so I just sort of naturally fell into this when I found independent publishing. And I started out like I was, pretty much broke, which is why I started doing my own covers. Like, indie artists pretty much start out broke.
But you are amazing at it. It's surprisingly good. I mean,
yeah, I am now. I wasn't when I started, because I started way back in 2007, just when the indie author movement began, just about. So my first covers were, kind of just standard generic things that the publishing sites were supplying for covers. Because I started out, I was just doing paperbacks at one point because ebooks hadn't really caught on. So yeah, you can go on Goodreads with a couple of my books and you can actually see the progression of the covers and the cover art. And you can see how terrible I used to be. Because, you know, when I started out, I had no idea what I was doing, but I took the time to learn and figure out how to use things like Photoshop. And I really love YouTube because they have so many great tutorials on YouTube for Photoshop that you can learn how to use things and how to do tricks and figure out how to put stuff together. So I'm really self-taught.
That's amazing. How about you, Josh?
Well, I have the good fortune to have started my artistic career before the internet was really a thing. So I don't have this trail behind me. I get to curate the old stuff people see of mine. Yeah, so I started kind of, even in high school, I always wanted to make a unique fantasy universe. And when I started, I was doing that thing that most people who start out do, which is regurgitating stuff I liked from other IPs, you know, whether it was Dungeons and Dragons, Lord of the Rings, et cetera, et cetera. And at some point, I want to say in my maybe mid to late 20s, I had this thought, you know, my mom taught me so much about science growing up. It seemed like, why not make a filter for myself of scientific plausibility and use that to kind of guide and direct my artistic vision for this world that I'm developing. And that really pushed me in really unique directions when you try to figure out, how could a giant actually exist? How could their lung capacity work? How can their hearts get enough blood all over their body? How can they stand so that they don't sink into the ground? There are all these interesting questions that come up that force you to change the design in really radical ways. So that's been a fun process that I've been doing for a couple decades now. And my mom / co-author, who has this medical background and also has been writing science fiction for about 40 years, she just decided to help me. So she started writing books in my universe, which drove the world building and visual development side that I've been doing. So it's been a really fun collaboration. Our first book is out. Our second one, like you said, is coming out next month. So yeah, that's kind of my background in history.
Oh, well done. How about you, Michael?
Oh, well, I'm 30 now, but I started like doing world building a bit like Josh. I started creating my own fantasy world from basically since I was 14, 15. I used to like borrow English exercise books from my teacher and then just write the entire thing in them and do no work in them. So I ended up really annoying them, just writing down all this lore, and then all that lore has just been building, and then the Thousand Scars eventually came from that. Like parts of that world sort of combined with other things I was doing. And then I started to create maps, first of all trying to draw them until I realized I couldn't draw. So then I switched to online software and things, and I started to, I mean, I think you can tell as well, as Anita said, it's like I wasn't very good when I started, but as the years went on, I gradually improved.
Oh, that's so good. I mean, and what kind of resources do you use for your visual creations? I mean, different media, photography, and obviously maps for you.
Oh, we'll start with me. How to say? My main interest is the ancient history, so I studied a lot of Hellenistic, Roman, Carthaginian, Persian history, which is the sort of influence behind the world I've been building, and lots of video games and like the world building and lore that comes from that. So far too many games.
You've made your book cover as well, right? And
I didn't make my book cover. My artistic talent is limited to maps.
But are there maps in your book?
There's one map in that book, but it was like several years ago when I wasn't as good. So the new map, which I've been working on, it is hopefully much better.
And for those maps, what do you use a software, or do you draw by hand and then scan?
I occasionally do some sketching by hand. I'm using a program I'm using a cartography program right now for most of my cartography work.
Is it Wonderdraft? It looks like Wonderdraft.
Yeah, it is Wonderdraft, yeah.
That's really neat. One of the really cool things that has happened over the past decade is the amount of tools that enable people who, you know, can't draw well or whatever to make really stunning graphical things, you know, with from Photoshop to that to, you know, a variety of things.
That's definitely true. It makes it a lot
really
easier.
Great. The same thing has happened in the game industry where the game engines are becoming easier and easier to use. You know, and in the film industry, it just there's been this huge creative explosion with new, better tools.
It's wonderful.
That help people. Yeah.
I mean, I broke on the games industry last year. I spent a year as a freelance writer for a video game company called Grimwall Games,
Nice.
which was in Germany, which I did last year.
Do you sketch as well, Josh?
Oh yeah, I do a little bit of everything. I have a YouTube channel where I teach a variety of art from sculpting to drawing, even into game design and stuff like that. So I have a very broad but narrow, or broad but shallow, you know, the classic jack of all trade, master of none. That's what I am.
How about you, Anita?
Yeah, well, I sketch and draw and paint. I did it a long time for just a hobby. Anyway, so and as for the maps, I actually do draw my own maps from scratch. I don't use the software. I have not mastered the software yet.
So your
I mean, I'm the opposite. I haven't mastered drawing, so.
Yeah, my maps, like I only have one map in my fan. Well, actually, I have more than one map, but they're all drawn from hand. And the maps I'll have in any new fantasy series going on won't be drawn. I like to draw maps. I've always drawn maps. I'm not sure exactly how geographically correct my old maps were. I'm going forward. I'm going to be researching that more. Anyway, and a lot of my inspirations come from mythology and folklore and history. So I draw on that as well for drawing in maps and stuff.
It's good to give your readers, I think it's an advantage that you can illustrate what you envision, because your readers have that taste. Is that right? How do you feel about that?
Well, yeah, it helps when you're doing the book covers, because you kind of know the idea, the representation that you want on the cover, and you can kind of translate that into the illustration, the artwork.
Now, Anita, let's talk about the Visions and Nightmares cover. Can you show us a bit? That's amazing. So as illustrators, we search for the right elements and colors to set the scene and create a sense of atmosphere for the book. I have to say, you've aced it. This cover truly gives visions and nightmares. It's a great sense of atmosphere.
Yeah, it is kind of representative of the stories in the book too, because at least two of them involve a mirror, or sort of involve a mirror. One of them does, and one of them's based on Alice in Wonderland, so the mirror is implied, and the other one actually involves a mirror. So that I wanted the mirror. That was a great kind of representation of the whole, because and the arm coming out of it is sort of indicative of another story, and the whole weird world that it's sitting on, because several of the stories take place in either alternate dimensions or alternate fantasy worlds, so that sort of ties them. And so all the stories are kind of tied into one picture for the cover art, and it kind of worked out well.
And Josh, in a previous discussion, you told me about using scientific plausibility as a design constraint. How does that impact the visual development of the world and the creatures and characters?
Well, the first thing it does is slows everything down to a snail's crawl, as we do a lot of research. And that, so because I've invested over, you know, the past 20 years in a lot of education for myself, and then my mom has her biology degree and all that kind of stuff. We have kind of a baseline, but because knowledge has proliferated so much over the past century, it's impossible to really accurately well, to know all the stuff you need to know to actually truly be scientifically plausible. So we spend a lot of time trying to track down experts in different fields to ask questions all over the place. And I'm sure we're still missing a lot of stuff. What I'm hoping to do is actually cultivate a community of people who are into this new IP I'm developing, the Tales from Telfar, who can do the well actually thing that annoys most other creators, where they can say, you know, you can't actually do that.
Right? I mean,
yeah, and because there's so much energy out there. You have forums full of people debating how could a bomber work in space in Star Wars or Star Trek? How can this and that happen? And there's just all this nerd energy that exists out there. I want to capture some of that and actually put it, you know, I will be the IP that listens to you people, as opposed to the ones who just ignore you and they're like, no, we're just going to do our own thing, you know, regardless. So yeah, that's one of the things I took from my experience making massive multiplayer games is the books that I'm publishing. You can see there that is version 1.0. So the idea is that as new information comes across, I'm willing to change things. So here's a perfect example of what we did. This is the island that our protagonist starts on, right? And there's a side of the island called Wet Side, and that is the side that the prevailing winds blow in. Because it's a tropical island, it's right on the equator. It blows in the daily rains, et cetera, et cetera. It's on the west side. Once I put it on the planet, and we had already determined the planet is pretty much Earth, and it spins the same direction as Earth, there's no way prevailing winds can come from the west. So in version 1.1, that map is going to be flipped. We've edited it so that every time they say west, they're actually going east and vice versa, right? So yeah, it slows everything down. It's ridiculous. It's a bizarre constraint. I don't recommend it for anyone else, but we love it. It just makes everything take forever.
It makes it very interactive as well as kind of an open world to the readers as well.
Yeah, that's what I'm hoping.
Well done. And Michael, tell us, how far do you go with your cartography in the world building? What elements do you feel that are more important to add to create that reality?
I probably go too far, to be honest. How to say? It's quite a tough question, actually.
Did I catch you in the
yeah?
Never thought about that.
I think for map building, I try to make maps of almost everything. So my main fantasy world takes place. It just takes place in one universe with just one planetary body. I'd love to say I've put as much thought into the science side as Josh, but I'd be lying. So I haven't put as much thought into all the science and geography.
You know, it's a trade-off between actually getting anything done and doing it my way. So
yeah, world building's wonderful, but it comes at a cost, which you can spend so much time world building, you never actually get the damn book written. So, I mean, when I world build, I always try and create the maps. I usually try and write some stuff down first. So I build like a skeleton of the map, and then I map it out as my characters go through.
Yeah.
For example, I found in another novel which I'm working on, it's like a very sort of Carthaginian Greek city-state kind of setting, like African setting. And I was like, right, there's not much fantasy out there that does terror birds. Can I incorporate terror bird cavalry into this? Played around and I found, right, what would it be like if there was no horses in this part of the world? I was like, experiment, let's see what we can do. And I started building all the cities and stuff, and I was like, right, how did they get here? And I was like, okay, what if there was part of a commonwealth which was destroyed by another empire, but these cities managed to hold on, and now it's a very powerful trading league. So that's all snowballed, and I started making maps of all the cities and stuff. So
that's great.
It's very time consuming, but it's fun.
Do you merge the worlds from one book to the other? I mean,
yeah, my Counterbalance series takes place actually on the other side of the world as this novel, which is going to be a part of another series because I apparently don't know how to write standalone books. So,
do you think that the characters can be from the same universe, even in different universes?
I think definitely. They're from the same universe. They'll never meet each other. For one, it's a different time, as well as them. There's sort of like magical reasons which I haven't worked out what they are yet. Why they one side from across on the other side of the world can't visit the other. There's vast parts of the world building which haven't been done yet. As I'm sure people here knows, it's an ongoing journey.
It's a never-ending hole you can just dump all of your time and resources into forever. At some point, you just gotta start writing.
Get it out. You gotta get it out there and go, wait, I actually need to make money here. What can I do?
Does that happen as well with horror, Anita?
Well, there's not a lot of the horror takes place that I write takes place in the real world or history, because I write a lot of historical horror, because Victorian England is really a nice atmosphere for horror stories, for me at least. And with a lot of my horrors is short stories. So there's not a lot of world building taking place with the short stories. But with my epic fantasy series, I had to do a lot of world building. And with the map I drew for it, that had to go hand in hand with the world building, because I had to get my ships from one place to the next place. So I had to make sure all the little towns on the map were within like a day's sail or a 2-day sail or whatever was the timeline in the story. So I had to work all that out and get the map to add up as well. So that was fun. But the scientific part in my world doesn't really come into it too much, because the world was actually created by the goddess of chaos, taking some of her breath and creating a world. So not a lot of science in that.
That's fantastic.
For my part, like I love fantasy that is either on one side of the spectrum or the other. If it's going to go mythological, go full mythological. I love that.
On that note, how do you guys ever merge these? Well, Michael was talking about different universes and in different times and characters that won't meet. But how about this a sense of that one universe could make part of the other one, like aliens could be a part of monsters and mythology? Or do you like that, or no one in each?
It's interesting because it feels like out there in pop culture, all of these mashups they're more acceptable now. I think kind of the postmodern sensibility is so pervaded our society that we're willing to, if it's a fun, exciting story that has cool set pieces and fun characters, we'll go anywhere for the most part. So I don't have a problem with it.
Mm-hmm. How about you, Michael?
I'm open to it. Like I might give it a go at some point in the future. So yeah, as Josh says, I'm open to it. I'm happy with it. So
how do you transit from one to the other, Anita? From horror to fantasy, or do you merge?
Well, most of my horror and fantasy is connected through either folklore or mythology, because a lot of my horror is folklore based. So there's always, well, not always, because I do a few serial killer things and stuff like that as well. But a lot of my horror stories have a fantasy element in there somewhere. So there's not that much of a transition. Basically, my horror is just like darker.
Mm-hmm.
Like really, well, my fantasy's dark, but the horror is darker than the fantasy.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I also write a bit of steampunk, so mixing the science and the fantasy there is where I do it.
And you go, Josh, you were about to say something?
No, I was just thinking of scientifically plausible steampunk, how hard that would be to pull off, because it's so much about the aesthetic. I'm curious to know what kind of science do you infuse in there?
That's the hardest part that I did when I started writing steampunk, was to actually try and reconcile my brain with the accurate history that I usually do with the steampunk part of it, because that's not really accurate in a lot of cases. But when I started to research the science in history, there is actually a lot of things that could have been right? Because I mean, they had a lot of the theories and the technology and stuff. So if you tweak this and tweak that, you can get a plausible more than a possible. But yeah, it's like, how in the freaking heck do airships run? Because I mean, really, that's the hardest thing I had to figure out, was how to get an airship. Because I mean, basically, I mean, you could have a blimp, but if you're going to have like a luxury liner with people and rooms, like was what I wanted with one of my books, you got to stretch it a lot.
Yeah,
but still
the
have
volume
enough
of gas required to hold up a certain amount of weight is
yeah,
far more than we've ever been shown.
luckily the steampunk fans are really kind of, they'll overlook that. So
yeah, I mean, these are the same people who glue hot glue brass gears to their hat, and now it's a steampunk hat, so you know.
I've seen that in a Comic-Con.
It's great, I love it.
And how about creatures? What's the concept that you use? Josh, you talked about the anatomy of them, and is that something that you like playing a lot?
Oh yeah, actually, you know, going off of what Anita was talking about, I've been trying to figure out a way to have a scientifically plausible sky whale. So going off of the idea that metabolizing hydrogen is not an impossible thing, going into the biochemistry of it has been really interesting. I've been talking to a lot of biochemists, well, not a lot, 2 biochemists. Some return my calls and some don't. And trying to figure out, okay, once you have the hydrogen, how much do you need? How can it be either dispersed in such a way that it can, you know, because obviously when you pack hydrogen together, you're priming yourself for a Hindenburg. So some of those problems, the solution is these creatures cannot live anywhere where there's lightning. It's just, they're just gonna turn into toasted marshmallows. So they're underground. And the reason we have these giant underground cave networks are because there's these, everything kind of feeds together. So working in networks, we have these giant creatures that are the size of, you know, bigger than the biggest dinosaurs, and they're kind of from the same planet. We're working, just for a little backstory. No, I won't do backstory. Premise is you've got a preserved planet where aliens have taken other sentient creatures that their planet would have been destroyed, transplanted them onto the closest type of planet that can support them. So Talifar has about a dozen sentient races on it. Technology is suppressed so they don't all nuke each other. Anyway, you've got these giants and they need to eat. How do you provide enough calories for something that large to eat in a concentrated source, right? So we came up with this idea of this mushroom that metabolizes rock underground, and so it creates this slurry that the giants can eat. But it also has this whole ecosystem inside, including our sky whales. And sometimes when those cave in, the sky whales will come up out of the ground, and they don't last very long. They'll last a day or 2 max before they're destroyed by something or another. Anyway, yeah, so all of that stuff, it's just a constant. I find it incredibly fun and invigorating to do these exercises and try to figure out how far can we push. You know, I'm trying to actually be plausible, but how far can you push the fantastical while still being plausible?
Someone's
asking
asking.
this. That just makes me want to read your stuff now.
Oh, excellent. It's on Amazon. Buy it today.
Someone's asking you, what if the skin was an insulator?
Yes, it definitely is an insulator, and the hydrogen is compartmentalized in a lot of little bubbles. It's like bubble wrap, just wrapped, and then like a very rubbery insulating skin. But they still would have to ground it. So the giants do that by having grounding mechanisms, because they have to have like 20 to 30 legs to hold up their weight, even though they're mostly hydrogen. But they still, yeah. So that, anyway, I don't want to hog up all the time, because I could talk forever about it.
It's a lot for storytelling, isn't it? I mean,
yeah.
And a lot of development for a character or a creature, in that case, in its design.
Yeah, it's, like I said, it just pushes us in radically different directions than I've seen before. And so that's what's really exciting about it. And I just like nerd debates and talking about that kind of stuff, so.
You have a great creature in one of your books, Anita. the book cover of Ghost Simon?
Ghost of
Ghost
the
of
Simon.
Simon? Yeah.
Okay, is that the ebook cover or the print cover? Because there's two different creatures.
Oh, then tell me about.
Well, the print cover basically has, you know, like just the fin. It sort of looks like a mermaid, but it's not really. It's supposed to be one of the sea monsters. Like the whole premise of Ghost of the Sea Moon and the other two books are sea monsters, basically roam the ocean. So, but the ebook cover is actually supposed to be, you know, your typical Kraken sort of a character.
Mm-hmm.
So, but basically the premise in Ghost of the Sea Moon is the sea monsters, they roam the seas after storms and they eat the souls of dead sailors, of the drowned sailors. Mm-hmm. And the main character is the god of souls, and he tries to rescue the souls of the drowned sailors from the sea monsters. And then there's also his sister who's trying to kill him and stuff. So, but the sea monsters in Ghost of the Sea Moon are actually the goddess of the moon's children. So there's a certain amount of magical aspect to them. But I did, in a lot of cases, you know, try and base them on actual undersea creatures like octopus or eels or things like that. And with some folklore and some mythological stuff thrown in to make them more fantastical.
Mm-hmm. How about you, Michael?
A lot of I've got some creation stuff, like a lot of my animals and stuff from World Builder have been taken from like prehistoric times and stuff. As I said, terror birds was like one element of the African Carthage sort of heist novel series I'm working on, which is in the same world as the Caravan series. I've got fantasy creatures as well. I've got demon spirits who guard the moral plane, which is the part of my universe. It's a separate plane where life goes after death, but it's an entirely separate like living world as well. So these demons have been summoned by can be summoned by like the human dark forces as such in Counterbalance, and they're basically very, very powerful, and an army doesn't want to take one on. So in Counterbalance as well, it's got a lot of elements of necromancy, which is basically the core of the entire series. So there's a lot of undead rituals and dark stuff happening about that.
Where do you guys go to get inspiration? I mean, there's a lot of video game playing and self-immersion in video games, but movies, cemeteries, museums.
Yeah, well, Ghost of the Sea Moon and the Saga of the Outer and the trilogy, that's all inspired by Greek mythology with a little Norse mythology thrown in and set in like a kind of 18th century British naval vibe to it. And so that's the inspiration for that. And then in like book 2, I threw in a little Ray Harryhausen and a little Lovecraft. So, and then in book 3, the evil pirates, the undead evil pirates show up. So there's more inspiration. So,
how about you, Josh?
I mean, I think we all embody what we grew up with. You know, I grew up with Star Wars and, you know, the fantasy of the 80s, and video games of that era as well. I think by taking archetypes, you know, fantasy archetypes that people expect, such as giants, goblins, fairies, whatever, and then running it through my scientific plausibility filter, that's how I end up with the unique things that I have. But I love the feeling of fantasy so much that I'd never want to betray that fantastical side of my creatures and characters. So I make sure that after they go through that filter, it's kind of an iteration. I'm like, okay, how can I still make sure they are in that archetype and fulfill the reader's desire to be in a fantasy world and recognize some of these tropes and archetypes that they love so much. So, I mean, from a visual perspective, for instance, I've got this guy Skola, and you meet him near the end of book 1, and he's a huge character in book 2 and 3 of our series. And you can see from his visual proportions, he fits that archetype of the baby face. So you've got your baby Yoda, your regular Yoda, your E.T., Stitch from Lilo and Stitch, the Gremlins, right? All of these guys have this same kind of spatial proportions. But I just wanted to do a unique thing with it, the type of character they are. So they're played against type a little bit. And they're, so besides just visually being a little bit distinct, not so much that they are so alien that they're off-putting, right? So it's finding that balance. It's really interesting to me as a visual developer.
Is that model made by you?
Yeah, I do a really stupid process to make my book covers, you know. So here's the book cover, and it was made by sculpting this sculpture in ZBrush, 3D printing it, re-sculpting over it because the 3D print wasn't good enough, casting it, molding it, casting it, painting it, photographing it, then putting it on the cover. It's the worst process. Don't anyone do it. But yeah,
sounds like a fantastic process. It's amazing.
But on the plus side, now I have products, you know, that I can sell at my shop once, you know, our books are popular. So.
And Michael, do you feel the same with sketching and producing your maps?
Yeah, I wish I had like different answers to Josh and Anita about inspiration. My inspiration is pretty much very similar. I grew up with Lord of the Rings and I guess Harry Potter, even though now I wouldn't use it very much. So I use them as inspiration, playing old games like Elder Scrolls, Dragon Age, Witcher, all that gave me the inspiration to create my own world. So I wish I had a more in-depth answer, but I don't really.
Jenny Hannaford is asking, do any of you create art/maps for other authors? And if so, how much involvement do you have with the authors?
I'll answer. Yeah, I do commissions for other authors. I've linked my main portfolio cartography page in the Zoom group chat, which is Fantasy World Emporium. I've been doing that for commission work for like 3 years now. So, and yeah, sometimes I get full creative control. Like sometimes I just get given, this basic sketch and details going, let's see what you can do. And it's okay. And I'm always in contact with them throughout. So it's like, I send them updates. It's like, okay, how does this look? And it's like, do you need any changes?
Mm-hmm.
Pure that even better. And it's like, if you want some tweaks, I'll make them. And sometimes they'll just go, right, this is exactly what I want. Can you do this? And it's like, yeah, sure. And but it does vary.
The Swordsmith is asking a question for Josh, but I'm gonna open it to all of you. What is the most exciting part of the creative process and the most rewarding?
Well, I don't know. I feel like there's always this modulation that goes on as far as my excitement level. You know, when you first come up with this idea, it's like a drug, right? All you can do is think about this idea and just developing it in your head. And then you start working on it, and that's when the hard work starts, and then it goes down into a trough of drudgery. And then you it starts showing promise, or you show it to someone as a work in progress, and people get excited about it, it pops back up, you know, so it's just constantly up and down. I don't know that I could point to one peak and say, this is it, this is the final thing. I mean, what I'm driving towards ultimately is to have these stories that we've been developing. We have 11 novels written so far, is to develop them into some type of visual medium, like a Game of Thrones TV show, but with a better ending. And you know, so it's like there's this constant uphill journey that's so far from where we are now that it's, I don't know, I don't have a lot of stop and smell the roses moments. So it's just, I always have my eye on this unattainable prize that I'm shooting towards, which I don't know, that's just my personality.
Fair enough.
The journey must be fun though.
It is.
How about you, Anita?
Basically, when I stop hating what I'm doing, when it all comes together, I go, yes, that's what I was going for. You know, and when I can get the things to sit right and do what I want them to do, that's when it's the most rewarding. It's like when it finally comes together and I'm going, yes, that's the look I was going for. That's perfect or as perfect I'm going to get it.
How about you, Michael?
My favorite part is probably the lore and the history sort of thing. I mean, I was a history graduate, so all of that, and especially military history, I'm obsessed with it. So when I build the world and the maps and stuff, it's like, right, the geography, how does this affect history, especially military history? And it's like, how does the magic and maybe the domesticated creatures and stuff, how do they impact world history? Again, I'm going to go back to the terror bird stuff. It's like, but there's no horses here, and even if there were horses, the terror birds would probably dominate. So it's like, how would they be used as cavalry? So it's learning how to use it. And I may not have got it completely right yet, but because the book's still in development. But that's probably my favorite part about it. It's just creating a history and making sure that the world you build is immersive.
Misty 306 is asking, not all speculative fiction stories have illustrations or maps. Do you believe this is a method for the readers to use more of their imagination?
There's a trade-off for sure, but because, like I said, I'm trying to develop a new intellectual property, IP. There's all of the visual development that I'm investing in right now. The idea is that will feed into future, visual mediums and stuff like that. So I know I definitely over illustrate my books. This book has 70 something illustrations in it. So it's just over the top. And yeah, that is constraining to some people. Some people want to have that thing live in their head. But also that feeds into the inevitable backlash when a thing comes out and it looks different than the way you imagined it when you were reading the book. And so everyone says the book is better. So maybe I'm curtailing that a bit by just showing you, hey, here's my vision for what these things look like.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, there is a certain trade-off for what the author sees the characters as and the readers see the characters as, and sometimes it doesn't necessarily mesh. But I like, personally as a reader, I like things like maps in books. I mean, I'm not necessarily wanting like character sketches or anything like that, although they can be fun too, to see, how the author sees the character. Although I think I prefer to look at character sketches and things like that after I read the book.
Yeah.
But maps I like, because maps give you kind of more of a sense of the world, to me, at least when I'm reading things, as opposed to taking away from it.
A question to you all. As people who are creatively immersed in a fantasy world, do you build worlds that you want to visit?
Conceptually, yes. In real life, no.
Yeah.
The worlds I build.
Oh my God, it's creative.
So the worlds I build are terrifying, so I would not want to visit it.
Yeah, I'm in that category too. The worlds I build, they're not exactly fun places to visit. There's a lot of things that can kill you.
I try to do, my world in general, I want it to have a lot of room for different kinds of stories. Like from the beginning, I want to set a precedent, because this is a mistake that I think a lot of IPs make, like Star Wars, Harry Potter, Lord of the Rings, any of these, they start in a particular medium with a particular tone. And then everything that comes after is kind of shoehorned into that same thing. And if it varies too much, then the fan base gets upset. So what I'm trying to do is, from the beginning, we're going to have action adventure, we're going to have mystery, we're going to have romance, we're going to have, whatever can happen in a world like Telefar. I want to have stories like that so that our bandwidth is as wide as possible. So to that end, yes, there will be cozy cottage mysteries where you can go and have tea in a comfortable place and sleep in a comfortable bed. I'll go to that part of Telefar.
I'd like to go there too. How about you, Michael?
Sorry, what was the question? I apologize, I spaced out.
No problem. So we're talking about being immersed in a fantasy world and building worlds that you want to visit, and that's for
I mean, I answered this at the beginning. I mean, the worlds I build are terrifying. I do not want to visit them.
Fair enough, fair enough.
Yeah.
And how about visual cues? So like scars and hairstyle and clothing, they all show a bit of the character stories and background. How do you put them together?
I try. I mean, I'm very light on character description. Probably a bit too light. I think that's probably the weakness I've got in writing. Sometimes my descriptions of characters just don't go far enough. So I'm probably not the best. I'm probably not the best person to answer this question very well.
Describing characters is a very
it's a pain in the ass.
Yeah.
Well, yes, but specifically because it's so easy to go overboard, it's very difficult to impart that information without it being some kind of a lore dump, and often it will constrain you in a way, you know, because readers are very good at just imagining what it is, and so they can paint their own picture. So in my opinion, it's better to err on the side of too little information than too much, but that probably depends on the genre too.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I don't do a lot of character description either. Most of my character description usually ends up in some sort of action, like, you know, he ran his fingers through his brown hair or something like that. Yeah, I keep forgetting, frankly, to describe my characters. So,
nevertheless, Josh, you said that you have this very intricate process of building a character, of sculpting it and designing it and 3D printing. That's
yeah,
incredible.
No, and not only that, but you know, because our book starts as when our protagonist is young, I've designed them at all different ages as well. So yeah, I would never put myself out there and as an example of the way anyone should do anything. It's just my wonky process. But I mean, again, one of the things I'm trying to do is impart that fantasy feel, but with some twist. So I keep reaching the wrong way because it's different.
Yeah, which is also very authentic. I mean,
yeah, but so Beaumark here, you know, you're not going to look at him and think, oh, this is Tolkien-esque European-based fantasy, right? There's a lot of visual cues that say this is not your typical European prince out on a quest, and so there's important space to set yourself apart. But again, like I was saying, I still hope to hit those archetypes in satisfying ways.
yeah. And do you have any projects ongoing? I know next book is coming, delayed book.
Well, okay, actually relevant to this panel specifically, after the third book comes out, because our first foray into Talifar is going to be this trilogy, and then other books will be following other characters, other time periods. But after book 3, we've been working on a coloring book, because we've been doing all this visual development. Those are kind of like adult coloring books are kind of a hot thing right now. We figured, why not? So that should be interesting to tackle. But looking forward to that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. How about you, Michael?
I've got quite a few projects on the go. 1,000 Scars I've been rewriting, get ready for the relaunch. That's been delayed because of financial stuff, and obviously the pandemic's created quite a lot of uncertainty at the moment. So I've been working on that. I'm working on another fantasy series, or pretty much everything I write fantasies in the same universe, because I want to keep going with the world. Mm-hmm. So in the works, that's in edits. I could show. I mean, my Scrivener's got like 20 different planned projects. So I'm gonna keep building the world. There's like a codex book, which is like 100,000 words of lore so far. So that's gonna always be something I'll add to. I'm ghostwriting a science fiction novel at the moment. So that's an interesting experiment I've been doing. I mean, that's writing related. Cartography, I'm gonna continue hopefully getting more commissions. I've got a couple of new clients. I've been working on building the Caravans universe and like maps. I hope to eventually have like every city and every region mapped out to perfection, which is going to take untold amounts of time. So,
Anita?
Yeah, I'm currently working on a new series based on Arthurian legend and set in the modern day. I hope to have the 2 short stories I've already written republished around June, July, and the first book hopefully out by the end of the year. So, but that, yeah, I'm writing the whole series at once, so I'm trying to get all the threads pulled together at the moment.
That's a lot to keep up with. I mean,
Yeah, well, the first 4 books in the series, I should say, because it's like the first 4 books are going to be one arc, and then see what happens from there.
Anita, is this the first time that you've done multiple book arcs and planned them from the beginning, or have you done that before?
Yes, and I started it this way because the last trilogy I did 1 book at a time, and it's like, yeah, trying to keep track of what was in book 1 that was already published to pull over to book 2 was just so painful.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm planning out the whole freaking series arc, because like there's an arc that runs through from book 1 through to book 4. So I'm planning that all out and getting everything aligned and no mistakes. Cross your fingers.
Do you, when building fantasy, okay, this might sound a bit repetitive, but I want to see how you go with this. Okay, since you draw the worlds you envision, and how deep do you go into fantasy, and how much is based in real life, as your real life, not real life, as your personal story, your personal lives?
Normally not a lot, but with this new series, the main character seems to have a lot of my personality. Well, some of it, I mean, some of it that's nowhere near me, but yeah. And normally when I'm writing fantasy worlds, I'm drawing more on history than anything. This one I had to draw a little bit more on real life and modern stuff, because it's part of it is set in the real world, part of it's set in other interdimensional worlds I call netherworlds. So that's where the fantasy elements come back into play more, because you're going to get dragons and elves and elementals in those worlds as well. And so yeah, this series is a little bit of a new thing for me.
How about you, Josh?
Well, so because I'm part of a writing duo, and my co-author happens to also be my mother, that's a very kind of unique partnership. She claims that she created Beaumark, she wrote Beaumark as if he were me. So she used my personality to kind of drive his decisions. I don't necessarily see that, but that's her interpretation of me. So that's great. But since I'm more on the world development side of things rather than the plotting, I come up with themes, and together we decide, okay, how are we going to plot these themes out? On the latest book, we're working on, this is either novel 11 or 12 at this point. They're all in various stages of development. But in this one, I wanted to do a very, maybe it's a little hit you over the head analogy, where it's a mother and son team, but they're this underwater type of creatures who have to go and deliver a message to a monarch who is in kind of a mile-high city. So they've got to go up out of the water and figure out how to get up there and overcome all these challenges. And the mother becomes disabled through, so there's all these things that are pulled from our life, and but put in interesting metaphors within Talifar. So that's been a fun process. We'll see how it works out artistically.
Mm-hmm. And you, Michael?
For me, I think I'd say Counterbalance is sort of like 65% based on like real life, like ancient history, with like 35% fantasy. So there's a lot. I mean, I think one of my reviews on Booknest for the Thousand Scars, the old one, described it as fantasy Greek versus Persia with undead. So, which was a pretty cool way to describe it. So, yeah. I don't really put too much of myself in my characters because I'm irritated enough as it is. I don't really expect people to like read about people who are like me as well. So I I didn't know, I wasn't really sure how to answer that question, to be honest, but I like how it's blend and balance between fantasy and real life.
I think a lot of our influences, including ourselves, impact our art in subconscious ways. So it's very hard to draw that out and articulate it.
Yeah.
Sorry, you were saying. Nope. And what about your routine? How much has it changed, or did it go better with the lockdown, or it's just the way it used to be?
I guess I'll go first. I mean, I have chronic health issues and stuff, so most of my time is near home, so lockdown hasn't changed that much. Obviously, it's been quite stressful and stuff, like finding work has been a bit difficult because obviously people aren't commissioning you, obviously, when they're struggling as well, so which is fair enough. I actually, earlier in March, I think, I was working on a new schedule, like daily schedule, which I've been sticking to. So it's like do some editing, do some writing, do some cartography. I'm going to do a shameless plug now because why not? I decided to do Twitch streaming, so it's like so I thought that'll be fun to do during lockdown. I'm going to do cartography and gaming and stuff. I'm just going to post a link because why not? There we go. So I've been working on that as a schedule. So it hasn't really changed a huge amount. It's obviously more stressful right now, but I'm trying to keep at least productive.
Mm-hmm.
Fair enough.
Yeah, that's kind of a tricky thing, I think, with the, well, okay, personally, I've had no problem with the lockdown because I got laid off about this time last year from a game company I worked at for 15 and a half years. And so I started working from home since then, and I got a new job a couple of months ago, and then about 3 weeks into it, it went to work from home. So I've had almost exactly the same schedule for an entire year now. My kids are grown, you know, my wife is disabled, so we've all just been in the house, just doing our thing, same as always. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I work from home too, so the daily schedule hasn't changed. I've gotten a lot more interest in my book chat show from authors, though, this month. So I've been doing a lot more of that lately. But yeah, but other than that, there's really been not that much change.
Well, as we approach the end of this panel, let's finish with the last question. If you could give one simple advice to anyone who wants to start, what would it be?
Practice. Lots and lots and lots of practice.
Have fun. Try and think of like a reason why you want to world build. Like if you want to create novels and stuff with it, do as much world building as you want to, but you're gonna have to start writing at some point. So don't go into it too heavily if you want to do that. If you just want to world build for the sake of it, by all means go nuts and just have fun with it, really.
Yep.
Yeah, I think for my part, what I usually tell, you know, I teach sculpting and design and stuff like that. And what I usually say is that the first time you do anything, it's going to take you 10 times longer. And, you know, you're going to make all these mistakes. Second time, it just gets easier and easier as you go. So just start doing the thing. But the other really important thing is to see other people around you as potential collaborators, not in the sense that they're helping you do work, but bounce ideas off them, show them your work in progress, listen to what they have to say, you know, unless they're you know, purposely acerbic people who just want to tear you down. But most people are not like that. Most people want to encourage you in your creative journey. And listen to that. You never know where fun, creative, other ideas will come from other perspectives. So.
Fantastic. And on that note, I'd like to thank you all, our talented panelists, our talented panelists for this insightful panel, and to our audience for their participation. Make sure you catch the readings with Virginia McLean and Alicia Wanstall-Burke, and check out the artist's alley and don't miss the next QuaranCon panel, Magical Systems in Fantasy, with Justin Lee Anderson, Stephen Arian, Carol A. Puck, and Clayton Snyder. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, guys. That was amazing. Stay home and stay safe.
Thank you.
Okay, guys.
Bye.